Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Yes, I'm Neil Dallaway, so I'm head of delivery at Circyl. So I'm responsible for all aspects of delivery and also development of future propositions, one of which was Copilot, and we've actually started rolling that out now. So that's what we'd like to talk to you about today. So without further ado, we'll crack on. So the agenda for today then. So it's a general topic around Copilot, so we want to try and introduce to those that don't know what it is, how do you get it, what can it do, and how do you use it. And then the second half of the session will be a little bit more technical in terms of how you get ready to use it within your business. So if you did want to roll out Copilot, what are the things you need to think about, what do you need to know, and how we at Circyl and Quiss collaboratively, easy for me to say, collaboratively can help. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that. So what is Copilot and how does it help? So in general terms, it's an AI powered assistant. However, in much less general terms and in layman's terms, it's like having a personal assistant within your Microsoft 365 applications. So it can help with a variety of tasks, making your work life easier and making you much more efficient. So imagine having someone who can summarize important documents, catch you up on communications, generate drafts of emails, or help you prepare for meetings. That's what Copilot does. So it's specifically designed to understand your needs, provide you with the right information at the right time, whether you're working in Word, Excel, PowerPoint. That's what Copilot is there to do. It comes in various guises, so there are several versions of Copilot. So the user versions that were specific to you as users, you have Microsoft Copilot, Microsoft 365 Copilot Chat, and Microsoft 365 Copilot. The difference is, so Microsoft Copilot is everybody gets it. So it's free, it's available in Edge. So anybody who can use the Edge platform can log on. There's a Copilot icon, and you can do some basic things such as general use of AI-powered assistants and searching quite simply for summarizing things like PDFs. Now, the next level up is Microsoft 365 Copilot Chat, and that comes with anybody who has a Microsoft license. So in most cases, if you're using Microsoft as your platform, you will have Microsoft licenses and therefore have access to Microsoft Copilot Chat, which is essentially very much like Copilot, but it's a bit more use of within your tenant and your information within what you hold. So rather than it just being based on web data, it can actually integrate with your internal systems a lot better. And then finally, Microsoft 365 Copilot, the difference there is that then it starts to integrate with all of your applications. So it will be built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and I'll be touching on how that is a little bit later in the presentation. But those are the three versions that you should be aware of for the purposes of this webinar. There's a further version, which is Copilot Studio. Now, Copilot Studio is very much what we at Circyl would use. So it's a developer's tool for developers. So essentially what we can do by using Copilot Studio is use AI to write specific needs for customers. So if a customer has a specific need of what they want an AI bot to do that isn't covered by the standard, we can go in and we can build Copilot agents. Now, we won't be going into too much detail on agents today. It's something that you would hit further down your roadmap of your artificial intelligence usage, but it's important to know that it does exist. So how do you get Copilot? So as with anything Microsoft, it can be a little bit complicated in terms of the licensing, but we've tried to simplify it as much as possible. So there are eligible plans which will give you that Microsoft Copilot Chat. So 365, E3, E5, A3 and A5, as well as the Microsoft 365 Business Standards, Premium and Office 365, E3, E5, A3 and A5. Now that may sound like a jumble of letters. That's certainly something that Quiss can help with to understand. But essentially, if you've got a standard Microsoft license and you're able to use Office generally, then you will have access to the basic Copilot version. Then there is the specific Copilot licensing cost. So this is where you get the additional features for Copilot. You can do that on an annual subscription per person, which currently sits around £277 per person per year, or they've recently introduced a monthly SKU, which means you can pay for it on a monthly basis at 24.26, so totaling 291. Now, there are enterprise agreements, so if you do decide to scale this in across your business on a much larger scale, then again, it's something that Quiss can help with, but if not, your licensed reseller will be able to look into getting value out of those Copilot's licenses. I won't go into the Copilot Studio licensing in here, but it is on the slides for when we send them out later. What we recommend is to deploy gradually. So we'll talk a little bit later about readiness of your tenant, but actually in a controlled environment, you could implement Copilot quite quickly. So for instance, within Circyl, when we first started using Copilot, we bought a small number of licenses, we put them in a controlled area of people, namely senior leadership to start with, to see what could be accessed and what couldn't. And when we were ready, we rolled it out to more people and we reassigned those licenses, because it's quite simple to reassign those licenses for people who weren't necessarily getting the best use out of Copilot, or maybe somebody needed to use it for a specific need. So that's one of the recommendations we would make. And again, we cover that a bit later in the presentation when we talk about readiness. So how do you access Copilot? So business chat is quite straightforward. You can go to Microsoft 365 Copilot, and that's when you can get the business chat. So that is the basics, if you like, of accessing Copilot. However, obviously, there's more access to it within your applications. So how do you do that, and what can it do? So first of all, there's Microsoft Business Chat and Teams. Microsoft Biz Chat is the main difference between the two is that Biz Chat uses the web. Think of it as Bing superpowered. So being able to ask Bing specific questions in a natural language, and it will come back with artificial intelligent responses. It helps you quickly catch up on things, create content, brainstorm ideas. Then another element of it is that it's Copilot can be built into Microsoft Teams. So you start seeing Copilot sat within Microsoft Teams. You can click the button and then it will start using the context of your whole Teams environment. So it will use your chats that you've had. It will be able to look at your calendar and be able to say, right, this meeting is coming up in an hour. Are you prepared for it? And how can we help you get prepared for it? Or you can ask it that question as well. The key benefit of it being in Teams over BizChat is that it does use everything within Teams. So one of the main benefits I found, for instance, is transcribing the meetings afterwards. You can then manipulate the notes of that meetings, interrogate them, and really get your notes out of that meeting extremely quickly and more accurate than you ever could before. More specifically, what you can do. So these are just some of the items that you can do in the BizChat and Teams area. So summarize emails where I was mentioned. So that will give you a quick summary of any email you've been mentioned on, for instance, in the last week where you've got an action. Create content from multiple sources. So by bringing in different documents, you could create a particular content. So let me write an email about this person based on this subject, and it will write that email for you, and then all you've got to do is tweak it. You can write minutes out the back of meetings. You can take actions out the back of meetings, and this is really simple. You are literally just writing, help me write minutes from this meeting, and it will give you a list of the minutes. The only thing you have to do then is just check for accuracy, because AI isn't always accurate. And then send those out, but they're quick and they're accurate, and that's what's important. And it helps you prepare. So if you're going to a meeting that you're not prepared for, you could actually ask it, say, look, prepare me for this meeting. Who am I seeing? What's their job role? What are they interested in? It will scour all of the emails on the subject, all of any Teams conversations that you've had, and any content from your calendar, bring it all together and put it all in one place. So it really does become a game changer in that sense. Then obviously you have Copilot within the application. So I've put a few examples here to kind of bring that to life. So Copilot in Word, you could draft a job description from nothing. So you could literally say, if you're looking for a new job, previously you might have had to engage a recruiter to have them have a conversation with them. but actually you can really get first drafts out quite easily now, because it goes to the web content, it will look at your internal content, and it will bring it together and say, that's the job description for that role based on these documents, and it references all of the documents that it has used to create that work. Copilot in Outlook, so you can draft personalized emails. So if you want a formal email, or you want something that's a little bit more light-hearted, you can give it the sentiment that you want, and write the email. It can also rewrite your email. So if you've written an email, you don't quite like how it sounds, you can say, rewrite this for me, and it will rewrite that email for you. It's really kind of revolutionizing communication. And then finally, I've included Copilot in PowerPoint, because this is something really powerful, that you can take a document, you can reference that document, and say, help me create slides in PowerPoint based on that document, and it will take the content of the document, bring it into a selection of slides. Then actually what that's done is break the back of the task. Then all you have to go in is tweak it, add your own personalization to it. So it really is quite powerful within the applications. Recently it's been released, and it's actually getting stronger and stronger in Excel. So when you've sat there and think, well, how do I do that? How do I write a formula that does, a percentage based on a group of numbers? You can literally ask it the question, how do I do this sum? What is the formula for this sum? And it will write the formula for you. So it's just, again, making things quicker and making people more efficient. Something really useful as well, as particularly for small businesses who might not necessarily have in-team graphic design, or might be using a third party to do graphic design. You can get some quick images together using AI, using Copilot now. So for instance, every icon and every image that you see in this presentation was done using artificial intelligence Copilot, simply by asking it, I'd like a robot doing a automated task, etc., and it will bring up those tasks, those visualizations. So these three visuals here are AI visualizations. So I asked for, an office with animals, and that's why the office with all the dogs. So it's effortless. It takes minutes to do that, and you can tweak it. It will give you several options. You can say, include more people, include less people, include more dogs. So it really is flexible, but it's, again, just making presentations and LinkedIn posts, etc., much more vibrant and much more interesting without the need to go to a third party. So that's something that's really taking off at the moment. How do I use it? So what's the best way of getting it out of Copilot, and what do we do? So there are specific ways to prompt Copilot. So there is a Copilot lab. It's very useful. So Microsoft have put a lot of time over the past few years into their Microsoft Learn platform. The Copilot lab is exactly that. It's how you use it. And the more you go into the lab, it will talk about new releases that you'll automatically get as part of your subscription as you update. So you can go in there, you can see some of the things that it recommends. There are videos and guidance. So from a training perspective, it really is quite easy to roll out as well. However, from a basics perspective, there are some quite simple things you can do to really get Copilot working for you. So how to prompt Copilot. Microsoft recommend that you go for a goal, the context, the expectation, and the source. So what do you want it to do? Why do you need it, and who is involved? How should Copilot respond? And what data or samples do you want us to get? So I've given an example here. I want a list of 3 bullet points for an upcoming meeting with X, focusing on their current state. Respond with a tone that's friendly and authoritative, and focus on email and Teams chats over the last 2 weeks. Now, if you do that, it will bring that information together, and then all you have to do is tweak that information based on how you want to change it. So I've given a bit more of an example here. So give me a sentence in 75 words on why Copilot is a great business tool for presentation to prospective clients that is friendly and welcoming. Use sources from the Microsoft website. So as you can see, what that's done is pulled together a fairly comprehensive short paragraph there. Microsoft 365 Copilot is a fantastic business tool because it enhances productivity and created by automating repetitive tasks. So you can see it's quite a good sentence that's brought together. But if that doesn't work, you can change it. So for instance, now do it in the style of an over-top Microsoft product launch. And you get the ladies and gentlemen, prepare to be amazed. Introducing Microsoft 365 Copilot, the ultimate game changer for your business. Now, obviously, it's just having a bit of fun with that, but you can see how, for instance, if you were doing a LinkedIn post, you could write something and say, right now, Copilot, help me make this a LinkedIn post to be interesting to read for my my followers. It just gives it that little bit more life. And some people can technically put things down excellently, but may not have the creativity required. So Copilot is filling that gap for people and therefore making people more efficient and effective. You can then build it down as well. So just do me that in 3 bullets. And what that's done is taken that whole sentence and put it into 3 bullets. So you can imagine if you're doing a presentation that's really useful, because you can just drop the bullets in and have the context in the email below, in the notes section below. So to bring that to life a little bit, how would you use it in the real world? So generally across a team, it's going to boost productivity because it automates those repetitive tasks. It's going to enhance collaboration because it can streamline the workflows. You can ensure security, which we'll talk about later on. It improves communication because you can summarize those emails and quickly understand what's going on. Facilitate decision making by extracting like key points from a document. You can say, summarize the main points of this document, show me any risks in this document, and it will bring it all up. And then, as I said just in the previous deck, supporting creativity, because if you don't have that creative streak, Copilot can fill that gap. So for instance, a business owner, there's a few options on there, but one of the key ones I pointed out, recapping meetings. So when you're busy, you've got lots of meetings and it's very difficult to know which one you're going from next. You can literally say, what was the last meeting I had with this client? Or what was the last discussion we had? And it will bring it together. And instantly, before you go into that meeting, you know exactly what you're talking about and who to. In sales, for instance, you could accelerate sales presentations. So the Copilot I mentioned earlier within PowerPoint, you could have a conversation with a customer, take those notes, use those notes to create a PowerPoint deck in your slide template, and that customer could have a deck within the hour. Now, that kind of turnaround is quite impressive. You know, it's showing that you're a very efficient way of working. Customer services, this is a key one. I quite like this because this is where you can generate empathetic and professional responses. So sometimes I can imagine in customer service, it's quite an emotive area to work in. So emails are written and actually when you read it, it probably doesn't sound exactly how you'd like to send it. So you can use Copilot to look at that and say, well, you know, I recommend maybe you suggest that it's like this instead of how you've written it. And then, for instance, an IT manager. So it can build your process flows. So if you're in a meeting talking about processes and what happens in a certain order, you could literally say to Copilot afterwards, providing you've transcribed the meeting, help me write a process flow based on the conversations in this meeting. And it will help you build that flow. Now, it might not be perfect, but again, it's breaking the back of those everyday tasks that take a long time. And if you can just use Copilot and embrace the fact of using it, so you know, we don't hide the fact that we use Copilot. We're quite open with the fact that we use Copilot to help us transcribe our meetings, because actually what it's doing is freeing us up more time to do all the other things that actually make a difference. So I'll hand over to James. James is one of our technical consultants within Circyl. He's going to talk about how we can get your business ready for using Copilot.
Okay. Are you on the readiness assessment slide, Neil?
Yes.
Oh, my screen's not updated. Okay. So obviously with Copilot, as Neil said, we could simply purchase some licenses and assign them to the users. Unfortunately, for many users, it's not obvious what Copilot's capabilities are and how it will help them in their roles. They may know it can produce meeting notes or help them write an email, but how do they know what else it can do for them? Also, from a business perspective, how do we quantify that return on investment? Again, we know the license costs when we buy those licenses. Employees seem to be more productive, but how can we measure that? There is obviously there's also some obvious things we can do to help people prepare for Copilot and plan for a successful implementation. And ultimately, that's the things we're going to talk about today. Okay. So we've identified 4 key steps in the readiness, what we call in the readiness assessment to prepare company organizations for Copilot. So we're saying there's an organizational readiness phase. So as an organization, how can we prepare for Copilot so we maximize its benefits to our organization? So as we said, we can roll out some licenses, but how do people know what Copilot can do? How do we support them? How do we educate them? How do we get the best in that from that licensing cost in our organization? There's a technical readiness phase. So obviously we assign licenses, but how do we know what people will be able to do with those licenses? Do they have the right licenses? Technically, are they using the apps within Microsoft 365 environment which integrate into Copilot, or are they using external apps? And also, where is our information stored? Is it stored in locations where Copilot can access it? Obviously, a big part of Copilot is that it will make it very easy to find information. So from a governance perspective, do we have control over what data we're exposing to Copilot? Can I create a SharePoint site or a team, for example, and upload some content into it? Who's going to have access to that information? Is it the right people? So do we have owners for data who are going to take responsibility for it? Do we know that the data we have, say, in SharePoint or in our environment generally has the correct permissions, so people have access only to the data they need? Obviously, also, we need control over, obviously, the governance of that data. Obviously, as we say, it makes it easier for people to find it. So what we need to do is make sure that people do only have access, and we're ensuring the right controls are in place, as we'll talk about in a minute. Finally, from a security and compliance perspective, what control do we have over sensitive data in our organization? How is it shared, or how is it retained? How do we make sure that people can't share information they shouldn't be sharing? Okay. Next slide, Neil. So from an organizational readiness perspective, so for Copilot to be successful, we need to know who's involved in the project to implement it. What are their roles and responsibilities? So treat it like any other project. As we saw earlier, it's useful to support people in their roles by explaining to them how it can help them. As in, I'm a project manager, it can help me produce meeting notes, for example. Once people have a license and have access to Copilot, how do we help them going forward? So who's going to answer their questions, share best practice, explain the new functionality to make sure that they're getting the most benefit they can out of Copilot? One of the ways in which we can do this is, and this is an example form, is that we can capture who the different people are, who the different stakeholders involved are, and try to formalize that such that we capture their roles and responsibilities, their departments, and the individuals who probably will perform these tasks. For example, maybe we need an executive sponsor of the project who's going to ensure it's aligned with an organizational strategy. They're going to secure the necessary resources and funding to support the project, act as the primary point of contact for other stakeholders, and ultimately are accountable for the project's success. So we go through each of these roles. So for example, maybe we have project manager. They're going to manage projects, resources, and timescales. We define the roles, and this is going to make it easier over a period of the organization and the deployment of Copilot, obviously, to identify who's responsible for what and making sure that, say, we're providing the support needed for the adoption. One of the important things which we do within that is try to understand who the champions are. So form a centre of excellence, or people who are going to promote Copilot, answer questions and provide support. As Neil said, there's a series of business use cases. So once we've identified the stakeholders, it's useful to plan how we intend people are going to use Copilot. If we know what departments and roles they're in, and then we can understand how Copilot may benefit them, we can structure their training, and obviously we can provide them support when they get their license. As we said, obviously we want people who are going to provide the support for people. So often we'll call these Copilot champions or perform a centre of excellence. What's a champion going to do? Well, fundamentally, they're going to support the adoption process through providing training, collecting feedback, building awareness, and generally supporting users through the communication of shared resources and experiences. So say, for example, I'm using Copilot. I find a particular useful case for my role. Obviously, Copilot champions will help share that information with other users, so that we can all, as a community, we can all build that information such that we can make sure we're getting the best out of what Copilot can offer us. Obviously, bearing in mind also that the functionality behind Copilot is continually changing. Obviously, Copilot champions are also responsible for making sure that those new changes are reflected and people know what those changes are and reflected in the way in which, as an organization, we use Copilot. Obviously, once we're organized, we looked at the organizational considerations, we need to look at the technical readiness. So as Neil already said, obviously, do people have the right licenses? There's no point buying a Copilot license if users don't have the correct Microsoft or Office license. Obviously, Copilot integrates into the applications, so the applications need to be configured so that they're getting the latest updates to benefit from the changes in the Copilot functionality. So are they on the correct upgrade channel? Obviously, we need to look at where unstructured data is stored. So where do we store documents, spreadsheets, presentations, PDFs, media files? Is it in Microsoft 365? So is it in SharePoint, OneDrive, or Teams? Or is it somewhere Copilot can access it? If it's on a file server, for example, or an external system, Copilot won't naturally have access to that information. You can create connectors such that they can connect via Microsoft Graph so that Copilot can access it, but obviously there's work to do to make that information available. Again, obviously part of the readiness is looking at what tools people are using. What tools are they using for email and chat, for example? They're using Exchange online, they're using Teams, then we know Copilot's built into Outlook and the Teams application, and they'll have access to information. So these are all the things we need to consider, obviously, when we're looking at the licensing and the technical readiness of the environment. What can we expect to get out of assigning those Copilot licenses based upon, obviously, the state of that environment for interaction with Copilot. So another thing we need to consider is the governance around the information we have in that environment. So what controls do we have around in that environment for the creation of information? Like I say, if I create a site and upload some sensitive content into it, what happens if I incorrectly share it with somebody who shouldn't have access to it? Do we want those people to easily be able to find it using Copilot? Or do we want to have governance and framework around that to try to prevent that? Microsoft, as we'll see in a minute, have got tools to help us with that. Again, another thing is to do with ownership, obviously. So owners generally can go into control who has access to the data and make sure they have the right permissions. That's very important in Copilot because obviously the nature of oversharing of information, and also owners can know about the data sufficiently so they can understand its life cycle. So it's retention. So if information's become outdated, do we need to remove it such that Copilot can no longer access it? Obviously, Copilot will use all the information it has available and make determination factors about what it thinks is the most appropriate for the question you're asking in your prompt. Obviously, by removing information which is irrelevant or no longer up to date, we're helping make Copilot ensure that it's trying to find the right answers for us. As we said, obviously, Copilot's going to make it much easier to find information. I don't have to know where it is or do a search in SharePoint to go to a particular site or navigate for it. Just by asking a certain question, it's going to find those information and highlight what I have access to. So are we confident that people only have access to information they should see? And again, as we said, obviously the life cycle. So we have content. If we've got content in SharePoint, for example, which is outdated, do we have a process to archive it or delete it, or some way in which we can make sure that Copilot's not returning old results? Okay. And the final section really is to do with security and compliance, as we said. So how are we sharing and controlling what's shared in our organization? You don't want people having access to content they shouldn't because someone's inadvertently shared it. So someone might not have done that on purpose. I might have gone into SharePoint, for example, and shared a folder which I've got certain files in. Somebody else might come and put other files in there later on, or another folder, not really understanding the sensitivity or the classification of that information. And then obviously everyone I've shared that folder will also have access. So obviously inside Purview and inside the Microsoft 365 tenant, we have various things we can do. So we can use sensitive labels and policies. So define what the sensitivity of data and put policies around how that data is controlled. Obviously, one of the things we can do, as we say there, is essentially if we mark information as confidential, and I inadvertently share it with somebody, some of those policies have a control such that even if I've given you access to something you shouldn't see, if you're not defined as somebody who could see a confidential piece of information, Copilot won't return it. So some of those policies are going to provide essentially that belt and braces around who can access it, who can access that particular content. So I might have permissions to it, but because I'm not access to that level of sensitivity, Copilot's not going to let me out, not going to let me see it essentially. And again, as we said, as regards retention. So what are we doing about old data? If we don't want Copilot to reference it, then we need to make sure that it's not going to be in Copilot's scope of information. Obviously, hopefully, once we've completed our organisation and technical readiness, we can look at our governance and security and the compliance. Once we've looked at the readiness and the governance, security, and compliance, we can now start to plan how we're going to address any issues that's raised and support our Copilot rollout. Okay, so obviously, what we want to try to do as part of our adoption and strategy planning is we want to define a strategy. So what do we need to do to address the results of the readiness assessment? So we need to put a plan in place to address that. Obviously, we need to define a roadmap. As we say, we can just assign licenses to users, but how are we doing Big Bang, or are we doing a different approach? As Neil said, there's different approaches to be able to do that, to try to phase our deployment for us to make it manageable. And we'll see in a minute how we try to do that, such that we're gradually introducing users into it, and we're ensuring we're addressing the things which the technical readiness and the readiness phase is evaluated. Obviously, finally, like we say, we can anecdotally say that we think people will be more efficient, or they're saving time doing certain tasks, but how do we manage and monitor those, how people use Copilot? So employees might have a certain level of satisfaction. Ultimately, how do we evaluate whether Copilot in our organisation is providing the most benefit to our employees? It may say that obviously it's providing efficiency on time, but how do we quantify that efficiency, maybe from a cost perspective? Okay, so this slide is one example of an adoption strategy. Obviously, every company could probably be different. I mean, there's lots of information. So the source of information is from Microsoft, depending on your licensing and your approach, obviously and like I say, what we find in the readiness assessment is going to define what this strategy will be, and depending on what sort of licensing you have as well. So obviously, from the Microsoft Copilot perspective, do we need to limit what the SharePoint sites that Copilot can reference, because we're not sure about permissions? Do we need more time then for that to concentrate on that oversharing and fix it before we have a full Copilot rollout to the whole organization? Like we say, from SharePoint perspective, what we can see on the slide is it's suggesting things we want to check, and obviously certain settings we can make, like default links and link expiration, for example, to make our environment more secure and more compatible with the way in which users are going to start navigating and using it with Copilot. If we have certain other licenses like SharePoint Advanced Management, then we can do certain things like run DAG reports. If we don't have that, we can do some of those things manually. As we said before, obviously Purview is our gateway essentially to all the security and compliance and the governance framework. Obviously, we can turn on auditing. Have we configured sensitivity labels, DLP policies, retention policies, for example? Put more of that control around how Copilot's going to be used. Okay, so the next slide is an example deployment roadmap. So based on our strategy, which we've just defined, what phases are we going to have? So in this example, it's defined as a pilot phase with a restricted SharePoint search. So that's essentially limiting what Copilot can see, which SharePoint sites it can see, to give us time then not only to evaluate Copilot for those users, but also to address some of those security concerns and other technical issues around our environment. Obviously, to have a plan, we need to say how long we think each of those phases will be, how we'll measure success. Obviously, again, each organisation will probably be different, but this is probably a good starting point for a lot of organisations. As I just mentioned before, obviously, when Microsoft released Copilot, users started finding lots of content which organisations didn't want them to see. So to restrict that, obviously, Microsoft implemented this restricted search in SharePoint. So what it allows us to do is just to configure up to 100 sites which Copilot will have access to. They're from an IT perspective, it's then giving us access, or giving us time essentially to then look at those other sites, rather than just let Copilot have free reign across all those sources. It's going to give us time to look at those other sites and start considering whether the permissions are right. You know, what other of those technical things do we need to implement before we're happy that once we assign Copilot license to a bigger group of people, that we know that they're going to find information which is pertinent to their business as usual tasks. As we said too, obviously, once users have got the license, we need some way of measuring and supporting them. So how well is Copilot going to be adopted in our organization is to do with the employee satisfaction and how it's been measured. So we can have a series of defined phases, obviously an awareness. So we've trained the users who are going to get a license. We've explained to them in their role what Copilot can do, and we've given them the opportunity to use Copilot and test Copilot and see what it can do for them. Obviously, we could go into an engagement phase, which is now they've got Copilot, who provides things like continuous feedback loops, engage Copilot champions and Center of Excellence to give them support, start sharing the information and the findings of those users with other users. Obviously, measurement, so measure how Copilot's being used, where it's being used well, where more help is needed, other scenarios, again, as Copilot changes and new features are provided where we could use it. And obviously the management, again, which is due to using the feedback delivered target service roadmaps, promotion and communication to make Copilot better. So build upon all that information we've received and analysed and start providing that information back to support the people who are using Copilot better. Microsoft have a series of tools. So obviously inside the admin center, there's the Copilot dashboard. So that obviously not only shows us information about how users are using Copilot and what apps they're using, as an overall, obviously individual user details are obfuscated, so we can't see those. But obviously it's also going to show us general things like it's the overall health of Copilot and things like what new features are available to keep us aware that, maybe there's a feature which is going to be very useful to our organization coming up. What preparation do we need to do to make sure that users are aware of it and be able to take advantage of it? Obviously, one of the things we're talking to a lot of customers about at the moment is what are the risks of not implementing Copilot and having an AI strategy? And we're seeing more and more organizations starting to see, general use of AI in their organization in certain ways. So obviously we can ask the question, what is shadow AI? So obviously shadow AI refers to the use of AI tools within an organization without the knowledge or approval of the IT department. While AI tools can significantly enhance productivity and drive innovation, their unapproved use can pose substantial risks to data security, compliance, and organizational integrity. So why do people generally engage in the use of shadow AI? Typically because of the efficiency gains. There's lots of AI tools which might help them complete their tasks more quickly and efficiently. Most of the tools are easily accessible and user-friendly. They don't need specific training or approval processes. It's very easy for users to start using them and get real benefits early on. And obviously, to be innovative, individuals may want to experience and using new technologies to drive innovation and gain a competitive advantage. So obviously, are there any potential risks associated with people using these unapproved AI tools? And obviously, there is various risks. So obviously, security is a risk. If I've got unapproved AI tools, I can expose sensitive information to unauthorized third parties. If, for example, I upload a document or information to ChatGPT, once I've done that, I now have no control over what happens to that information and who can access it. Obviously, I've been using Copilot or tools that data resides inside my tenancy. It's not going out to Microsoft. I've still got control over that. Obviously, compliance as well. So AI tools may breach law, regulation, industrial standards, or corporate policies. Obviously, if we have sensitive information inside our environment, we have policies around that. It's audited so we can see it. We can run reports and see who's tried to access it in an unauthorized way. Obviously, if I upload it to ChatGPT or another AI agent, do I have access to those controls anymore? And obviously, as we said before about retention, the data integrity. So obviously, if I'm using inconsistent data handling and processing methods by some of these AI tools, I can compromise our integrity and accuracy of our data. If those tools are looking at old or outdated data that's no longer correct, the results or conclusions it's reaching could be wrong. Obviously, if we're using those outputs then to drive business decisions, our decisions could be based on incorrect logic. So how do we manage the effective use of AI? It's very difficult to stop people using unapproved AI tools without having a policy which encourages responsible behavior. Obviously, as an organization, we can block AI tools so that people can't access them on our networks. obviously new tools are appearing every week, making that more difficult. So again, as we see with the general adoption of Copilot, which is an AI tool, how can we encourage the effective use of AI? Well, through communication. So obviously encouraging open communication between business units and IT to understand what AI tools are available and what they can do for those, what the requirements are for each of those departments. Having a governance framework, again, around what defines acceptable AI use within our organization. So maybe we've provided Copilot or we've provided approved tools. You know, our policy is that if you want access to other tools, they need to be approved. You know, employees shouldn't just go off and start using those tools because of the risks we've already identified. Obviously, it's our then responsibility of an organization probably to provide AI tools which can enhance those various departments' productivity. So obviously we need to be able to providing the tools which we think are going to be a benefit to our organization. Obviously, with those tools, we need to provide training and support, so equipping employees with the knowledge and skills required to leverage what those authorized AI tools can do effectively for them, provide training, workshop resources that highlight the benefits and best practice of using those approved AI solutions. And as we said, with Copilot, that innovation and feedback. So giving people access to the tools so they can experiment with them, the risk to enterprise data, providing a process where new tools can be evaluated, reviewed and approved, and provide that continuous feedback and flow of information about how people are using tools, what they're using them for, how we can all benefit from their tools adoption. Okay. So the next slide is obviously how can Circyl help you with the things we've identified today, the readiness and the adoption of Copilot. So again, as we spoke about before, we defined it as organizational readiness. So as an organization, what do we need to do? Again, each organization will be different, but looking at how for your organization, what's the right approach for AI adoption strategies, involving the right people in the organization, the stakeholders, the center of excellence and the champions and the people we need to support it at an organizational level for it to be successful. Obviously, the technical readiness phase, as we highlighted, to make sure that your environment is ready for people to use Copilot and that people are going to be able to find the information pertinent to what they need to do. Obviously, so we're looking at governance, so establishing frameworks for controlling how AI is used in your organization. And then obviously the security and compliance. So looking at things, is the things inside your environment and your licensing, which are going to help us control sensitive information, how it's shared, to ensure that we meet those regulatory standards. As part of our Copilot readiness activities, obviously we perform various and deliver various outputs. So we go through an analysis, as we said, for existing policies, permissions and retention, identify all areas which need to be addressed before Copilot can be fully deployed. Obviously that's all documented and identified as part of that readiness assessment. Obviously we produce an adoption strategy plan detailing how Copilot can be incorporated into your organization with recommendations for training, user readiness and long-term support structures. So obviously we work with lots of organizations, so it's using that understanding of working in different types of environment and that sort of best practice and recommendations from Microsoft as to how we can have the best possible adoption around Copilot. And obviously a deployment plan. So obviously deliver a plan that provides a clear actionable roadmap, complete with estimates and implementation steps and costs and timescales for your organization to try to make it a successful Copilot deployment. Thank you very much. I'll pass you back over to Richard now.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for that, James. So I'm playing Question Master today. We haven't had any questions come in during the presentation, but feel free to pop any immediate queries you've got, or thoughts, ideas, questions you might want to ask into the Q&A or into the chat now, and I can pick those up. We have had a couple of questions sent over to us before the webinar, so I'm going to start with those just to give people a bit of thinking time if they need it. So the first one that came through is really about implementation and avoiding the disruption of the day-to-day operation of your business. So how can a customer, a client, implement Copilot without creating too much disruption in their day-to-day operations?
Well, I think the key is there that this phased approach that we've talked about. So small pilot groups, individuals, AI council with representatives from IT, leadership, etc., and key departments. As I said, how we did it in Circyl initially, small group of people. It was controlled. We had kind of weekly catch-ups with each other to share experiences. But we also knew that within that area it was controlled, so we didn't need to worry about it disrupting too many people because it just became part of that group's weekly tasks. So that's probably what I would recommend from a disruption perspective, is really focusing on small pilot groups to get started.
Anything to add, James?
I think, as Neil says, essentially it's that, obviously, again, the small groups we chose obviously were representative of different parts of the company. So, we could use those individuals to use Copilot and see, the sort of results they were getting back. So I think, often it identifies areas where people have access to things they probably shouldn't. So obviously it's giving us that opportunity with a trusted set of people to start looking at some of those things we do with as part of that readiness phase and address those prior to a bigger rollout.
Sorry, I also think, just off the back of what James said there, it helped us recognize the things that we didn't have access to, as well as the stuff that it did. So we as a small group, even though we were a senior leadership team at the very start, I, for instance, queried some things to see what I could get access to, and actually I couldn't get access to some things that I wouldn't want to have access to. So that was a controlled test, but it was good because Microsoft have built-in guidelines, or guardrails, I think they call them, that stop you getting access to things that you shouldn't have access to anyway. So if I'm asking a blatant HR question, Copilot will actually stop and say, I'm not ready to answer that question for you.
So in terms of those small pilot groups, then, are there any departments or personnel groups that you would sort of generally recommend would be the first to receive Copilot, or the first to be in the pilot groups and be transitioned across?
Yeah, well, obviously you want the areas that use Microsoft 365 products the most. Your sales, marketing. From our perspective, after we'd done the initial kind of control group, we rolled it out to the project managers, just because I saw an immediate kind of efficiency improvement on the gathering of those meeting minutes. My project managers were spending time writing up minutes after a session, and they weren't as accurate. They were timely to get out. After I'd used it for a week or so, I said, right, we need to get this out there quickly, because the pulling together the information that it could pull together as quickly as it could, to the accuracy that it was just a complete game changer, because then my project managers can actually spend time dealing with the things that came out, the actions, the to do, rather than writing up the notes to tell everybody, by which time you've got the notes out, the actions could have passed. So from my perspective, I would say, somebody who uses it most, but, sales, project managers, maybe marketing, from a perspective of, your LinkedIn posts, getting a bit more creative content rather than having to go to potentially a third party. You could move up to the next step of marketing with the use of Copilot.
So you've mentioned,
I think, as you said, I think, Neil, sorry, that obviously also, like the senior leadership and those people who are often short of time. Copilot's very efficient at, can it summarize my emails? Can I prepared for my meetings? There's a lot of, good efficiency gains there at that, like you say, at the C-suite and the top level of employees, who can take immediate benefit from some of the functionality it provides out of the box.
Definitely.
And you've mentioned, we've seen how Copilot's sort of integrated into certain Microsoft technologies almost as standard. How does it fit with other existing or broader Microsoft existing investments, I guess?
Yeah, so obviously Copilot is based on Microsoft Graph, and it uses that to provide all the information. Obviously you can add connectors to that, so you can start looking at if those tools provide an interface into Copilot or interface into Graph to start extracting some of that information out to make that information available in Copilot. So obviously other Microsoft products will do that, external parties will do that as well. And even things like on a file server, for example, you could write those connectors to make that information available in Graph. So it's just looking at the capability of those products.
So essentially, it may well be that third-party applications that I'm running in my business will already have connectors built for Copilot to expose the data within those systems under the same security trimming to Copilot.
Yeah, often those things will already have an API and application programmer's interface. Obviously, as we say, over time and the popularity of AI, those tools will realize that, they need to provide this extra interface and into Copilot because of the assistance and the other functionality they're going to get with it.
So there's a question here about ROI. It's kind of in two parts, actually. So the first one is, the first part of it, I guess, is, are there any specific metrics or something that's consistent regardless of where the data is pulling from and really what I'm asking Copilot to do for me? Are there any metrics that I can use to measure for success?
I think it's the reduced time on routine tasks. I mean, like I said there, I've used a couple of examples, a couple of times the same example about getting those minutes out from the meeting. So it's just that reduced time of getting those minutes out, but maybe faster content creation. So the marketing is a good example. By being able to create the marketing content faster, you can actually put together a schedule where you're getting things out more regular. So for instance, we can use them to help us create blogs. So after a simple conversation with a customer, you can take that transcript, you can say, well, let's build a case study based on that. Previously, that can take weeks to get out once it's been written, once it's gone through iterations, once it's gone through review. But by using the tools, we're able to quickly produce those and produce them across multiple clients several times. So I think it's being able to measure that. How many things are you doing at the moment? How many LinkedIn posts are you doing at the moment? How many blogs per month? And then take that baseline and then, right, okay, how many are we doing after using a month of Copilot?
And just briefly, the second part of that question, realistically, from the perspective of, the average medium-sized company in the UK, what kind of ROI, return on investment, can we expect to see? And I suppose I'd add a little sort of second part to that. What have we seen, or what do we consider to be ROI within Circyl, having implemented it and using it on a day-to-day basis?
Well, if you consider going back to the license costs, the monthly cost of a Copilot license at £24 and something along those lines for the monthly cost, there's £24 a month, which is making somebody so much more efficient. So if you're working in IT consultancy, in law, people have hourly rates, and instantly you can just overlay those two numbers together, and it really makes it clear. Because if you're doing something within that hour that was previously taking you an hour to do that can only take 10 minutes, then it's not a difficult equation to work out that ROI. And I think that's what we've seen. We've seen, it's hard to put a monetary figure on it, but we've absolutely seen better efficiency. So getting those notes out quickly, getting those documents created quickly, being able to summarize meetings quickly, but then you're actually spending more time, for instance, in the project management world, doing the actions that you're supposed to do rather than reacting to them because you've missed them because you were busy writing the notes.
That's brilliant. Thank you. So Matt, I'm going to come back to you in a moment, but just from ourselves at Circyl, thank you very much, everybody, for taking the time to listen to us talk through the presentation and talk about Copilot. Matt, are you still there, or have I broke you?
No, I'm okay. I'm very interesting. Thank you ever so much, guys. As I mentioned at the beginning, we keep getting asked for all of this Copilot initiatives and innovation, and for us the readiness is the key part. So reaching out to each and everyone about the session. Obviously it's been recorded. We'll let everyone have pre-recordings for this if they want to share them within their business. But just from me and the wider Quiss and Circyl team, thank you again ever so much for joining, and on to the next one. Keep your eyes peeled for the second of the trilogy. And look forward to seeing you all back here. Thank you ever so much.